All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Omar Boum. I'm the Vice Chair of Undergraduate Studies in Anthropology and associated with NELC, and also a member of the Academic Committee of the Center for Near Eastern Studies, which is hosting this talk. It's my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Ksikes is a prolific fiction and nonfiction writer, playwright, journalist, and editor who lives in Rabat, Morocco. He is a director of the Centre d'études sociales économiques et maghrébien in Rabat, the editor-in-chief of the important periodical Economia, and also published a number of academic essays on Moroccan cultural life. His first play, Pas de mémoire, Mémoire de pas, was published in Casablanca in 1998. In the fields of drama and fiction, Ksikes has been called one of the most innovative writers in Morocco today, and was named one of the 6 best African playwrights by the National Studio Theatre in London. He is the author of numerous plays. I would name a few: Don't Hurry Up in Burying Big Brother, 2013, The Match, 2015, and novels such as Ma Boîte Noire, 2006, L'Homme des Sons du Silence, 2014, and a very acclaimed recent book, Odette Roy d'Aviros, 2017. Ksikes has also maintained an active journalism career, most notably as editor-in-chief of the groundbreaking Moroccan magazine Telkel and its Arabic sister publication Nishan from 2002 to 2006. As a non-fiction writer, he was awarded Le Grand Atlas Prize, Morocco's biggest book prize, in 2015 for his book Le Métier d'Intellectuel, which was co-authored by another colleague, Fadma Aitmous. His recent work includes the article, The Media in Morocco, a Highly Political Economy, the Case of the Paper and Online Press Since the Early 1990s, which he's co-authored with 2 colleagues too. Ksikes is also the co-founder of Data Theatre Citoyen, 2009-2012, co-organizer and curator of La Nuit des Philosophes in Rabat and Casablanca, and co-founder and coordinator of Fatima Mernissi Chair since 2015 to the present. If you want to know somebody who actually worked with Fatima Mernissi, many of you got somebody right here in front of you. He's a living memory of Fatima Mernissi. His professional accomplishment aside, Ksikes has throughout his life been an outspoken advocate for free speech and democracy in Morocco. His commitment to human rights has frequently crossed Morocco's notorious boundaries of acceptable speech and red lines. In 2006, the Moroccan government charged Ksikes and fellow journalists with defaming Islam and damaging public morality for an article in Nishan which marked the intersection of religion and politics. He was convicted, fined, and received a 3-year suspended jail sentence. He later said that the trial only increased his commitment to promoting public debate. Ksikes is a rare intellectual in North African media and academia. His main concern, besides writing and editing, is how to contribute to open and free public space in Morocco and beyond, and how to develop networks of creative thinking with Southerner partners. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Ksikes, who is going to talk today about artistic spaces, cultural dynamics, and new politics in North Africa.
Thank you so much, Omar, for welcoming me here. Thank you all for attending this talk. It looks like there are some time-bound research topics that appear to, in the long run, to be less temporary as they may seem to be at the beginning. This is probably the case of the investigation I've been leading around 2011. Is it about youth, internet users, new political movements in North Africa? None of these is my initial area of studies. Mine as a scholar is culture and media, and as a practitioner, fiction, nonfiction, and theater writing. Why bring my personal experience to the floor? How come both my research issues and artistic practices became intermingled? What brought me, while eager to distinguish aesthetics of creation and ethics of action, to think about a possible relation between artistic spaces, cultural dynamics, and new politics? Have there been old politics with no art and culture involved in it? Doesn't culture as a human activity expressing desires and belongings every time predefine but also extend political realms? Well, let me start by recalling two experiences that made me feel at the heart of all this. The first one will be around Débat Théâtre Citoyen, and mainly a laboratory we called الخبار في المسرح, which means news on stage. And the second one will be around the book Métier intellectuel, and the question that was raised in 2011 everywhere, in North Africa mainly, the question is, where are the intellectuals? While people were in the streets, they were asking, where are the intellectuals? So I'll start then by talking about these, from these 2 points. Let me start with the experience of الخبار في المسرح, news on stage. That took place from 2009 to 2012. So you see that 2 years before 2011 and 1 year after in Rabat. The starting points were two quotations, one from Dostoevsky and from Aristophanes. Dostoevsky says, the universal sometimes is just in everyday news. And Aristophanes says, theater is the locus of public controversy. So we tried to create a place where, a small stage, where every month I was running a workshop of creative theater writing, taking news as raw material and creating debate out from this. What happened when we did this for nearly 30 sessions? Actually, there was a feeling of organic connection to the world through facts, news, and citizen appropriation of events. We realized, while talking to people, that history is not a predetermined flow, but an endless stream of events. Collaborative workshops created collective intelligence. Theater and performance are more about energy than more about discourse. So there was energy that was shared. Language was a performative tool, not only as a discursive element. And debate and knowledge, we had debate and knowledge not only through cognition, but mainly through sensations. The idea here is that you should feel it to grasp it. This is very important. Maybe we feel this more in societies where the literates tradition is not anchored, and feeling things to grasp them is something very crucial. And also we felt the need for materialized way to think the city while there is crisis of classical intermediation. Political intermediation, political parties are in crisis, even in in advanced democracies like yours, let alone in semi-autocracies like ours. So here we have a materialist way to think the city together. And also the idea, another idea that came out from all this experience is that art is not leading to political action, but helping build aesthetic and political awareness of what is common. And here I'm talking, well, while saying aesthetics, I'm not only meaning aesthetica, but also aesthesis, which means relation to your environment. As Felix Guattari puts it, social ecosophy. So you see how this is a practical experience on stage, 3 years in Morocco, every month taking place, brought us to think these questions. I will go further later. But more than that, through theater, I came to meet different experiences. And the first one from Egypt by Leila Hassan Suleiman. This is an image from No Time for Art. Actually, since 2010, 2011, we felt that there is an urge of documentary and forum theater. This is documentary theater bringing people to do testimony about military arrests on stage. And also, and as if there were echoes from one country to another, when I moved to Algeria, I am struck by what an excellent Algerian playwright is doing, Mustafa Ben Fodil. So Mustafa Ben Fodil is, maybe we're quite alike. He's journalist, playwright, fiction writer, and activist. I'm not activist, he's activist. He's today every Friday on the streets in Algeria. He's been arrested and he's been released again. And Mustafa Ben Fodil made an excellent play called End Igne. I will spell it. End here like the end of a film, an end of a movie. End slash Igne, I-G-G-N-E, which tells you something about Bouazizi, Ignatian. But End Igne means indignation. So it's a pun that he made. But actually, through his experience and the fact that this play had a long career, the feeling that theater could be used as a media to share sensations, neither filming nor classical nor digital media are able to convey. Only theater can convey these sensations of a person going through an experience. It's exactly the same thing I was saying about feel it to grasp it. And the last experience I would like to tackle in this first slot of my talk is Fadl Jaibi and Jalila Bakkar play Amnesia. Amnesia, or Yahya Yaish, Amnesia, is an incredible play that is talking about the fall of a dictator, but it was written and staged before Ben Ali was toppled down. This is not from Yahya Yaish. This is another play called Fear, which was the aftermath of the fall of the dictator. But what I realized through Fadl Jaibi's work, Fadl Jaibi, by the way, is one of the most leading theater figures in the Arab world. One of the most prominent ones. And I realized that as a director, he's a detector, of latent fears and apprehensions, will to revolt. Actually, I found out in people like him what I didn't find in social sciences. He's what I call seismograph of undetected movements. Seismograph of undetected movements in society. This is what social sciences is supposed to be doing, but was not doing it in my region, while theater was helping to realize that there was a will to revolt. I don't want to talk about my own experience. One of my plays was doing the same, but I will be too egotic to refer to it, so I'm not. So that's, this is the first experience, this story of theater in relationship with public questions was raising all these elements to me. The second experience is, as I told you, around the book of Métiers d'intellectuels, and this question raised by people in the street: where are the intellectuals? And actually, while doing the book and going through a lot of things, I realized many elements. First, the difference between knowledge and consciousness. In North African countries, and now it's no more the case. I mean, this is very important. There's a big shift. For a long time, people thought that being an intellectual is being a learned person, mutaqaf. So somebody who accumulated culture, accumulated knowledge. But actually, historically, anthropologically, in our societies, it's more consciousness than knowledge that is making of somebody an intellectual. A Cameroonian scholar, Ebussi Bulaga, says that people who hold diplomas are pseudo intellectuals. Pseudo intellectuals. Actually, where does this question of having knowledge come from? It has come from mainly from colonial experience and from France, where the figure of Sartre as somebody who is speaking out his mind is something very important. But we don't realize that besides Sartre, there was Michel de Certeau, who was more somebody who learned how to listen to others rather than speak to others. But Michel de Certeau didn't get the same impact as the Sartre. But also we forget, in our experience in our Muslim societies, the figure of the alim, the religious scholar, but also the nationalist thinker, who have in common the idea that they should say the truth to the ruler, whatever the price is. But more than that, when I was working on a figure of intellectual, I realized that during the years of Laid in our country, the places where there was intellectual debate were some reviews, cine clubs, amateur theater, and not necessarily at the places of classical knowledge places. And also, I realized also that there has been a long divide between elite and popular culture that make people think that when you have popular culture, you're not necessarily an intellectual. So, and then, but bit by bit, people came out to think how to consider pop art not as folklore, but as part of identity narratives, and understanding social complexity in order to understand social complexity and marginally act on it. So why the need for intellectuals by people who were in the streets? What does it say? People were not asking for what Michel Foucault calls the specific intellectual, somebody who knows something, knowledge, and wants to do more about this specific area. No, they're not talking about this. They're more talking about what Edward Said calls amateur intellectual. Who is the amateur intellectual? The amateur intellectual is the one who having a field, knows to step aside, knows how to step aside, because there is urgency, either because political autocracy, or because there is colonialism, or because there is hegemony, or whatever, and then he's taking his time, the time where the classical time of publishing, etc., is the one that a scholar is using, a specific intellectual is using. The amateur intellectual is taking more time with people and more time with causes. So that's what people are looking for, people who are stepping aside. The second thing, they are looking for what, of course, this figure developed by Gramsci of the organic intellectual. What's an organic intellectual? When you go back to prison memoirs of Gramsci, you understand that the idea mainly is to be curious enough in order to understand in practical world what's happening every day in people's life, in order to have a position towards the hegemonic forces. That's the main question. So you see, in all these points, they're asking for people to give time, to give attention. And here I recall another concept of intellectual, which is the collective intellectual. That's an historian, Gérard Noiriel, who is talking about the collective intellectual, the one who is like Michel de Certeau, listening to the others, being involved in spaces where we debate and we discuss and we try to make sense of things. So they're looking for non-experts who are not reserving their knowledge to the government. And actually, we realize that most of the people who are doing this are not necessarily people who have knowledge, but sometimes more sensations, feelings. And here, writers, artists, literary figures come to the front. And in Egypt, a central figure is Ala al-Aswani, who is a fiction writer, and who used to take a literary club regularly in order to make people understand what's happening in the world and what's the meaning of autocracy, what's the meaning of all things, going back to literature but creating public debate. Ala al-Aswani now is exiled in United States, and because he is under arrest in his country. So that's one figure, the people who are willing to listen and dialogue. But actually, and what is the trigger? Why people are waiting for people giving time? Because actually, when you see the despair of the symbolic despair that they're expressing, which is through the expression kifaya, girifna in Sudan, du ballet in sub-Saharan Africa, baraka, etc. Stop it. So what are they asking people to stop? Stop corruption, stop indifference, etc., etc. So you see this urge to be listened to. And also because they feel the weakening power of political parties, domestication of classical civil society, isolation and conformism of universities. I'm talking about our universities. End of media liberalization. So too many things are stuck. End of media liberalization is very important to keep in mind. I can go back to talk about it, but the idea here is that not only in our countries, but media as an industry has killed journalism as a vocation. We're talking more about content than news, more communication than investigation. So there is a feeling of what two scholars from Morocco, Abdelhaim al-Dinatayb al-Ghazi, called ihbat, disillusionment. But they're not talking about disillusionment as a suicide leading despair, but as a triggering defeat to imagine new ways out. So this is very important. They're looking for new ways out. They are desperate and looking for new ways out. That's why they're looking for intellectuals. Of course, we have slightly daring scholars, people, for example, from political science in Morocco, Tunisia, creating new generation of political science schools in order to help people, officials, young generations, in order to understand politics in their practice. The thing is, social media are generation bound, weakly invested by established intellectuals. So that's why we have rise of marginal social and cultural actors, blogging, artivism, media activism, will to act for change facing sophisticated surveillance. And meanwhile, we have something happening like you would find a music band, Hoba Hoba Spirit, who is rocking in mother tongue, reshuffling legacies of different musical heritage, producing concepts. So you see how popular culture is coming to the front, Bled Schizo, pop culture and political debates about society is created by artists. This is one of the most known bands in Morocco. And when I take this notion of Bled Schizo, which talking about schizophrenia, is something that has been talked about in the media, used in theater as a concept by theater companies, and also the figure himself, Reda Allali, he's a columnist in newspaper, and he's producing now podcasts about history in Morocco. So you see how artists are stepping back from only producing art into doing something that has to do with public debates. It's exactly the same thing that tried to do some alternative media. Either Memfakinch in Morocco, Madame Masr in Egypt, but actually they were all either censored or officially hacked. And while there was this limitations for alternative media, what do we find? We find street agoras, art venues, alternative art venues. So in Morocco, you have Al-Falsafa al-Zinqa, philosophy in the streets. You have spaces like Al-Batwar, l'Usine in Casablanca, Les Ateliers Sauvages in Algeria, and Dream City in Tunis. These are spaces that are creating possible interaction between art and public space. Intellectuals then are no more superior elites, but artists, interdisciplinary scholars, civil society dissidents, not only voicing anger, but listening to it or making it audible, making various dynamics meet and art help communities interact. So 2011 was first prefigured by cultural movements on public reading, giving back a place for philosophy in the city, and also advocating LGBT through body exposure and discussion and social movements. Let me now recall two side research projects that made me realize some common and uncommon criteria between North African countries. So yeah, here you see, this is Les Ateliers Sauvages in Algeria, which is more not as old as Dream City as an experience, for example, or Al-Batwar in Morocco. But when you talk to Wasilat Mzali, who is the founder, she says that she's not interested in arts for art's sake. She's interested in art as a pretext in order to create interactions. And this is something, this is one of the places that was most important before there were revolts in Algeria. Let me now recall, as I said, two research projects that made me realize some common and uncommon criteria between North African countries. I will talk first about Sahwa on youth and funding of arts and culture. Let me first start by the fact that in the aftermath of 2011, there were huge funds for studying youth. Weak existing studies, surveys, and fieldwork to understand complex dynamics at stake. That's what I talked about before. Hard negotiations in order not to serve as Southern scholars, as informants to fill in theoretical frameworks designed by northern scholars. This was a strong position when I'm talking here about Sahwa, which is a Mediterranean project of research on youth. So we had to redefine terms of academic collaboration, equalize relations from the university standpoint to making part of decolonizing politics of knowledge production and participating to what we call epistemic justice. But what are the outputs from what happened in Sahwa? What do we realize? First, weak political participation in formal politics, weak ties with institutions related to the state, values of family and religion are predominant, high connectivity, difference between Morocco as a Facebook country, Tunisia and Egypt as Twitter countries. And in order to explain this, you have to think of illiteracy rates, which is still very high in Morocco compared to the other countries. Middle class, the role played by knowledge production in public debates, weak welfare state, and high debt effects. And the will to immigrate is high everywhere, rate of educated unemployment and precarious employment as well. 70%, and this is a common figure, 70% of youth employed don't have contracts. So this is telling you the precarious state. Unexplained regression of gender equality in Moroccan and Egyptian cases. Entrepreneurship as a probably misleading collective way out in Morocco more particularly. Unrest between collective solidarity and hankering for individualism everywhere. Culture and arts being vehicles of this tension between community and individual. So now when I move to being involved as a juror and lecturer in various networks of arts and culture, and here you have Afaq, in the Arab and African countries, I came out to remark that since UNDP 2005 report on the Arab world, there have been parallel and complementary, if not conflicting initiatives that have blossomed. They are fostering from the Gulf states side translation, book awards, ta'sil, refounding of Arab specificity, and refurbishment of entertaining tourism. This creates, as in the European 19th century, women readership of novels, rewinding of Arab versions of humanities classics, discourse about identity through instrumentalization of various contemporary art forms, and a new museum culture to attract visitors and high culture supporters. But these initiatives are developing from liberal arts point of view, and this is where Hafaq fits, with steady support from European and American funds, Ford Foundation, Open Society Foundation, Scandinavian corporations, experimental art forms, new connection between artists and local societies and dynamics, mobility of Southern artists, anchoring of cultural venues. All this is complementing ex-colonizers' cultural agenda, allowing for more ritualization of culture, nascent public subsidies policies, and grassroots cross-disciplinary cooperations that were made invisible by mainstream entertaining media and gain again visibility thanks to social network and alternative media connections. So you realize that there are things moving either in terms of structure or in terms of willingness by actors. But what all this allowed me to see in terms of patterns and paths that I couldn't decipher before in the same way. I have 3 points, and then I'll come to my conclusion. The first big conclusion I come out with from all this is relationship between art and liminal spaces. And here we have to distinguish, following Claude Lefort, public and common space. Public space, as you know, is constructing together a city. Common space is a chaotic place that is putting everybody together until the ruler stops the chaos. And I think that we're still lingering between public and common space in these contexts. And actually, it's good also to follow Nancy Fraser on her notion of oppositional public space, but also to look at repression intensity. Oppositional spaces exist, but they shrink when repression intensity is high. Third, cultural movements fighting surveillance online and in the city. And also street arts between political instrumentalization and new aesthetics of the common. Street art is no more disruptive today. It has been used again by officials. But at the same time, it's creating new politics of the common when it brings people together to talk about these questions. But it's not always the case. Controversy around Naida. Naida is a notion that has been coined in Morocco around underground music. But it's a sort of revival of Nahda, Renaissance, through urban art movements. So as if urban art movements are creating a new revival, a new Renaissance movement, which is not totally the case. But it's very interesting to look what's happening sometimes in these spaces and in informal discussions. Also, we have private club of readers. This is very interesting when you look at public space in the Habermasian heritage. You understand, or also when you go back to what Terry Eagleton is talking about England in the late 19th century, the idea of private clubs of readers is something that looks as if it's outdated, but it's something that is coming out again in all these societies, and underground spaces. Loyalty being the major trend, and here I'm talking about exit, loyalty, and voice. Hirschman. Actually, loyalty being the major trend, either exit or voice are the two options that are used in these movements. So, for example, slam and urban poetry are in, but you feel that some political poetry and rap are out. And I take here, for example, you have a Moroccan rapper who is now in exile in Belgium because he was in prison before. Political poetry, Muhammad... what's his name? Sorry. No. Al-Haqd is the Moroccan one, but the Egyptian poet Muhammad Saha is in exile too. And also you have new political humor from Bassem Youssef, for example, who is also in exile from Egypt. So it's very interesting to look at what is politically correct in these expressions, and we feel like there are spaces of slight hope. I talked about les ateliers sauvages of Alger. I can talk about La Source du Lion in Morocco. I can talk about Le Théâtre de l'Opprimé in Casablanca as well. So all these are really very liminal spaces where artists are trying to have a take in public debate. What is interesting and what is really coming from these liminal spaces is that there is no hierarchy between learned and less learned, no class distinctions, possible dialogue triggered by art as a way to conceive public life, designing hashtags and mottos in vernacular language, as a readapter of universal issues for freedom of expression, secular state, Dawla al-Madaniya, economic equity through economic boycott in Morocco. All this is coming from a common language, vernacular language, and reused within social networks. So that was the first point, art and liminal spaces. The second point that's a big pattern, I think, is recycling of literary and artistic legacies. And here we have two main figures. Taha Hussein and Al-Kawakibi. They have been both rehabilitated as literary icons of courage, resistance, and saying no to voluntary servitude in 2011. Taha Hussein for being the author of في الشعر الجاهلي, pre-Islamic poetry, and Al-Kawakibi for his book on oppression, and they have been really taken as icons. One is from Lebanon, the other is from Syria, sorry, and the other is from Egypt, but they have been used throughout all the Arab countries as major figures and icons. There is also the idea, the right to memory and counter narratives. That's what creates political prisoners literature. But also, you have other types of literature. For example, I take here the example of Yusuf Zaidan in Egypt's Azazil, and the need to rewrite local mythologies with infinite controversies on fiction and truth, right of minorities, etc. He's taking, again, the figure of Hypatia and talking about Egypt and the whole question of Christian heritage in Egypt. Collage and bricolage as ways to make art encompass lost traditions, either in music or visual art. For example, when you take Hoba Hoba Spirit or other, they're using traditions, local traditions, and of course worldly experiences. We feel also that there is the will to decolonize imaginaries, fighting against lost memories and stereotypes, restoring oralities, local narratives, as well as deconstructing common beliefs and thoughts via new formats, podcasts, graphics, and video installations. And this is a new trend. The graphics is really totally new, and now you have really, it's coming from Algeria, from Lebanon, from Egypt, and now there is one new one called Hshuma from Morocco by Zine Mfasiki, who is an engineer and artist, a visual artist. So it's new ways of revisiting all these legacies. While hegemonic geopolitics are biasing priorities, so the context is very important, and corrupt regimes are repressing demands for change. Cultural and artistic movements are highly emphasizing on the need to look inward, to focus on capacities from within to understand, imagine, create, and dialogue. This is crucial, that's a major trend. We can call it patriotic, nationalistic, or identity-oriented, but it boils down to the idea that while Europe is closing frontiers, while we have a return of walls today, while migration is very selective, while there are new warfare, imperialism, more conservatism, and return of some fascist political traditions. In these countries, you feel that, okay, let's concentrate on what we can produce. Let's concentrate on our traditions. Let's concentrate, but also let's dialogue with the world. But let's have a take in the world from what we have from inward. That's a major point, and I think this is a crucially political point. The third element, and here I come to some shortcomings, is about dissemination and ways out. Actually, there are lack of venues. Even if I'm talking about all these, we should consider there is a lack of venues. Well, let's take Morocco. We moved in beginning of the 80s to today from 250 cinemas to 50. So we have more than 50,000 mosques in Morocco, but we don't have more than 20 working theaters, not more than 50 bookstores that are really giving visibility to outlets. So this is a big point. The second point is censorship, instrumentalization of culture as a political medium. This is still the way from ministries of culture, from authorities. We have also silo logics, making different spaces and dynamics isolated, not interconnected. And nascent, of course, fragmented and paradoxically mobilizing virtual space. This is very important. I mean, when you know how connectivity is high in North Africa, and how actually the lack of public space, we were talking about common space, is now creating something like virtual public space, but virtual public spaces, because we should go into different areas of virtual space. But it is mobilizing because that's what is creating a counter force in public space. We have viral breakthroughs through art forms. And here I want to show you this this drawing by a visual artist in Morocco, Sonia Wejou, while there was lately an affair about abortion and an imprisoned journalist for illegal abortion. And actually it was a political case. It was not about abortion. And Sonia Wejou came with this drawing. Her artistic work is on her website, etc. No, that's not what I'm talking about. When she came out with this, she put it on social networks. It became viral. And it has been sort of one of the main images used by people who were campaigning to free Hajar. The hashtag was free Hajar. And actually we realize in all these countries that there are random connections, I say random connections, between whistleblowers, citizen journalists, artists, and human rights organizations. It's not organized, but it's random, but it's working. It happens to work. Now, none of all what I have been saying so far is political per se, but potentially engaging high political stakes when we find that's what I like to call organic connectors. I am not sure the notion of organic intellectual as somebody who cares takes time, going back to what I said before. Listen to what is going on in praxis under the shade of hegemonies is completely lost. In a highly horizontal and imbricated configuration of actors, he's meant the organic connector, who is to me the new figure, is mending non-connected spaces. He's at the crossroads of dynamics, patient and disruptive. He's sometimes leading art space open to public interests, connecting with civil society, creating debate around common issues, and using art as a pretext. He's sometimes an orchestra man. You remember Reda Allali, I was talking about a moment ago. He's sometimes an orchestra man, multiplying his areas of intervention between journalism, writing, and activism, music, art, etc. He's more surprisingly connected to biopolitics through collaborative economic models, neighborhood dynamics, and international networks of solidarity. That's another type of figure. In all these configurations, there is common ground. Political reform is no more a matter of rulers and elites. It needs to be culturally built up because it is beforehand a matter of values, ideas, taste, and open dialogue. This needs, while classical ways of doing politics are coming to a dead end, to look at undisciplined practices and actors, in the sense of being undisciplinary, beyond formal interdisciplinarity, and unconcealing even insubordinated disobedient, and as such capable to go beyond institutional, discursive barriers and care about what is real at the heart of daily lives and people's dreams. When you see on the media insurrections, manifestations, they are just the visible part of invisible dynamics. That's what I'm trying to look at. Thank you.